Good evening, dear friends. Welcome to today's Know and Love series event. We are so happy today on behalf of the Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago to welcome back Dr. Colleen Taylor Sen to speak here today as our guest speaker. Colleen has spoken here before, and so she's a familiar face. And as a way of introduction, Colleen is a Canadian-American author who writes extensively on history, culture, and cuisine. She did her BA and MA at the University of Toronto and a PhD at Columbia University, New York, all in Slavic languages. Colleen also authored many books and articles. Her books have been translated into Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean languages. Colleen's articles have been published in many leading journals. So I think a couple of years ago, she spoke on the topic food and religion. And so today perhaps it will be a sequel of that, because she is also going to cover the topic of food and how it evolved over the ages. The topic of her talk today is how ancient India transformed the way the world eats. So we are looking forward to listen to her insights. There will be time for questions and answers at the end of the talk. So have your questions ready, and Colleen is here, so we can't wait to welcome her.
Thank you very much, Ravani. So this talk I'm giving is kind of, it's like it's based on several talks I've given before, but I want to start by saying in food history, there's a lot of talk about something called the Columbian exchange, and this is the transfer of plants, animals, cultures between the old world, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the new world, the Americas, following Christopher Columbus's voyages. Now, we always hear about how much food from the New World influenced the cuisine of India. For example, tomatoes, potatoes, chilies, peanuts, corn, papaya, pineapples, all sorts of things came from the New World to India. But I'm going to talk today about how food went the other way and how India influenced the food of the rest of the world. I just want to show you a couple of slides. This one, I'm going to start with the Indus Valley Harappan civilization. Just because it's very interesting, and archaeological research has been done, and we now know more or less what they ate then. The reason we know this is they find residue in cooking pots and in cows' teeth, believe it or not, and that they can analyze it and see what people ate. So this is the extent of the Indus Valley civilization when it was at its peak. And the next slide, this shows you some of the foods that they found at one location at Farman, that's in Haryana. What they've been finding recently, that the Indus Valley civilization is much larger than we thought. It's 70 miles from Delhi. There's a site, you have it in Gujarat, and this particular site is in Haryana. So you can see that some of the things they had wheat, barley, they had some rice, they had foxtail and prosit millet and sorghum, moong dal, but not masur dal. Masur dal and chana dal actually came from the Middle East. They had eggplant or brinjal, mango, various spices. They did not have black pepper, though. Black pepper came from further south in Kerala. Sesame, cucumbers, and probably bananas. So these are some of the things that existed from ancient times, and these are kind of at the basis of Indian food as we know it today. They're still eaten. And this other slide, I want to show you how many words in European languages actually are related to Indian languages. For example, the English word pepper, French poivre, Greek pfeffer, etc., all came from Sanskrit pipal. The word rice, as we know it, riz in French, Greek orisa, came from a Tamil word, aritsi, which originally meant a berry. The word sugar, in different languages, came from Sanskrit sarkara. The word candy came from Sanskrit khand. Camphor, And then interesting is eggplant, because eggplant, of course, in the UK and India, it's often called aubergine. Only in America do we call it eggplant. And that's related to, it came back through the Arabic and through Persian from a Sanskrit word that you can see here. And another word of Tamil origin is actually the mango. So these are just a couple of things that show you how important it was. And another thing that came from India was actually the ability to process sugar, to extract sugar from the sugar cane and to turn it into useful products. Now, sugar cane probably originated in several locations, maybe North India, maybe Micronesia, but Indians developed the technology to convert the juice to different products, and these include jaggery, khand, which is crystallized sugar, and solid sugar, which were called sarkara in Sanskrit. And some form of sugar was originally exported to ancient Greece. It was originally looked upon as a medicine. And eventually the knowledge of how to process sugar came from India to the Arabs. The Arab entrepreneurs adopted sugar refining techniques. Then it was grown in southern Europe. And from there it went throughout the world. What's kind of ironic is that sugar was grown in the West Indies, originally by slaves, and then when slavery was abolished, of course it was by Indians mainly from Bihar and UP, who became part of this group of indentured laborers. So they kind of went over there, and after 5 years they could either stay or go. But I want to say that the biggest contribution that India made to the world is vegetarianism. Now, I'm not a vegetarian, I'm not advocating vegetarianism, but I'm just saying this is something that India actually gave to the world. And how did this come about? Where did vegetarianism come from? Well, the ancient Vedic Indians, they were meat eaters. We know that from the Vedas. Their religion centered on the sacrifice of animals, eating their meat. But still, there's evidence that the seeds of vegetarianism may have been sown during the Vedic period, which is about 1700 to 1100 BCE, when sometimes the priest would substitute a pumpkin, a coconut, or an animal made of flour for the animal. And of course, at that time, one thing that's always been true of Indian food is that milk, dairy, yogurt, and other products were eaten, so that meat wasn't as essential for protein as it may have been elsewhere. Now, between the 8th and 6th century BCE, we had new attitudes and customs emerged that became central to Indian culture. And some of these concepts were expressed in the Upanishads and other texts. These were things like samsara, the idea that the self was faced with an endless cycle of rebirths, the idea of karma, and that one way of getting release from this endless cycle of rebirths was from withdrawing from society and renouncing the word, which is sannyasa. Now, some of these people who wanted to renounce and this was a time, I should say, of great urbanization. You had over 200 cities in northern India. You had the rise of kingdoms. With cities comes a certain angst, a certain philosophical searching. So that also led for these people to leave the world, leave the bustle of the city, and to move to the forest retreats. And here they practiced yoga, meditation. And some of them adopted very strict eating habits to help them with their spiritual exercises. For example, some ascetics only would eat plants that had fallen, or they would eat the meat of animals that had already been killed by other beasts. Others ate only food that was, only ate food that was wild and uncultivated. And this practice today, I think it survives in the fasting practice, which is called palahar, where you don't eat anything that is made by the plow, like rice or things like that. This is a typical little palahar thani. And so the wide range of cereals, oil seeds, vegetables, fruits, sweeteners, they made this possible to develop a very delicious and nutritious vegetarian cuisine. Now, these ascetics moved to the forest, they were by themselves, but some of them began to attract followers. And these followers formed small groups, and the groups became small sects, and then orders or congregation. Now, there were many of these. There was the Jains, there was the Buddhists. You also had a group called the Ajaviks. The Ajaviks, they were very strict determinists. They were even stricter than the Jains in some ways. They believed nothing you could do affected your fate, but nonetheless you had to lead an austere life. And then you had the Charavaks, who were very interesting. They kind of believed in eat, drink, and be merry. There was no gods. The Vedas were all nonsense, but so we should enjoy this life. Now, these last two, they lasted until maybe the 10th, 11th century. But really, we only know about them through the writings of the Jains and Buddhists. And of course, the Jains and Buddhists were kind of opposed to them. They were struggling for followers, so we really don't know too much about them. But we do know a lot about the Jains and Buddhists, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit. Now, okay, the Jains, this is some information. I don't want to go into all the details, how it was founded by Mahavir. He was a kshatriya, he was the son of a ruler, and he attained enlightenment. And this is just a little history of Jainism. He was actually the 24th of the founders of this religion, but he's the one that they look at mostly. And they had many beliefs. That the goal of existence is to free oneself from attachment to things. What prevents this is this idea of karma, which is sort of different than it is in Hinduism. And to do this, you had to follow certain principles, and these are the three jewels: right faith, right perception, right knowledge. And you take the 5 great vows. And the most important of these vows is ahimsa. Ahimsa, which really can be translated as non-injury. And this is all, they have a very complex philosophy of what life is. I mean, for them, life isn't just a human or an animal. It can go down to even to certain insects, to certain plants. It's a very, very evolved philosophy. I wrote a paper about Jainism. I gave it at Oxford. I was very interested in it because it's such an austere yet kind of convincing. So when it comes to food, we have to, that's what I'm talking about. Somebody once wrote that when it comes to food, nobody is more strict than the Jains. So 5 things are absolutely forbidden to all Jains: meat and meat products, fish, eggs, alcohol, and honey. And I think honey is interesting because I know some vegetarians eat honey, but strictly speaking, it does involve sometimes the death of bees. So, but then the other thing are people who are other food items. If you're going to be a Jain monk or if you're fasting, you have much stricter guidelines. So you're not supposed to eat fruit and vegetables with many seeds, such as figs or eggplants, vegetables that grow underground because you might destroy the insects, onions and garlic. Well, they're forbidden generally because they're believed to kind of inflame your passions. Fresh ginger and turmeric, foods containing yeast, cauliflower and cabbage. Now, these are more recent things. These actually came with the Europeans, but I suppose they do also, I don't know, they were also included, and buds and sprouts. So these are all things that if you're fasting or if you're very observant, you don't have. Now, it's interesting because I got very interested in this, and there was a restaurant on Army Trail Road called Village Hut. It was run by a Gujarati man, and he used to cater Jain banquets. And we had the meal there, and I belonged to a food group, Culinary Historians. They said, well, would you organize a Jain lunch for us? And I said, sure. So people came. We had a couple of members of the Jain community. It was broadcast in NPR. The food was so good without onions, garlic, any of these things. And of course, they're not vegan, so there was ghee, there was dairy products. People 15 years later still talk about that lunch, about how delicious it was. Unfortunately, he moved to Edison, so that restaurant isn't there. But it was a very interesting experience just to see what a rich cuisine could evolve. Now, then we come to, of course, Buddhism, which was maybe around the same time. The Buddha rejected austerities. He chose what he called the middle way. Originally, he did, starve himself. He fasted, but then he said this was not really leading to enlightenment. So he adopted the middle way, which was a path of moderation between the extremes of self-indulgence and self-modification. So the early Buddhists, they didn't really place any restrictions on the diets of lay people, but he did urge his followers to avoid excessive attachments to the pleasures of the table. And the food at Buddhist monasteries, and also he had convents for nuns. That was very the Jains also had nuns too, but he had convents for them. But the food at the monasteries was vegetarian. Now, outside the monasteries, where the monks were supposed to beg for their food, they had to accept anything that was given to them, even meat or fish, provided that the animal was not killed for them and they did not see the animal being slaughtered. So only really a few things were absolutely forbidden to all Buddhists, including alcohol and certain meats, including elephant, horse, and others. Now, Buddhism spread throughout the world. Many of the people who became followers of Buddhism and Jainism were actually merchants and traders. One thing that Buddhism had, it really tried to, both of them tried to kind of lessen caste differences, weaken them. They allowed women to enter and take an active part. So this made them more appealing to some people. And the people who became traders, they took the religion all over to Southeast Asia, and eventually it went to Korea, Japan, and China. And as it spread, it split into different sects. And the propriety of eating meat became a subject of doctrinal dispute. For example, in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka, monks eat meat if it's given to them. In China, Korea, and Vietnam, they're generally vegetarian. And in Tibet, a cold country where vegetables are scarce, they eat meat. And even the Dalai Lama eats meat. And one time, Paul McCartney, who was a big vegetarian, wrote him a letter, kind of criticizing him for doing this, but I can't remember what he said. So in India, this is a little thing about and you can see how Buddhism spread throughout the world. And I gave a talk a while ago on the Emperor Ashoka Maurya, who was a Buddhist himself, but the message he spread was really to appeal to all religions, to Jains, Buddhists, even the Ajafiks, and his father was a follower of the Jains. So the Maurya emperors were pretty open-minded when it came to the different sects that were in their kingdom. And of course, this is a famous statement that he put in his inscriptions that he put all over the thing, that he didn't want killing at that spot, and that he himself would do his best not to eat meat in the royal palace, except for a couple of things, and those eventually would stop. There's a lot of debate among people, Sanskrit historians. Why did he rule out these things like the peacocks? Why were they kind of exempt temporarily? And one theory is that the name of the dynasty, Maurya, comes from the word Moira for peacock. That was one reason. I've forgotten the other ones, but we really just don't know. And he set up hospitals for animals. He had veterinary clinics, so he was quite an advocate of animals. And these were ideas that he got from his subjects, from the Jains and the Buddhists. And I think that's very interesting. Now, how did these ideas enter? Well, people were attracted to these groups, for many reasons. First of all, as I mentioned, they were not so strict about caste. They allowed women, and when the Brahmins had the sacrifice, it was very expensive. They would go and get cows from a farm, or whatever they were sacrificing from a farmer, whatever the animal was. Some of these sacrifices involved hundreds of animals. So this kind of relieved a burden on people. They didn't have to give their animals for the sacrifice. And so the Brahmins kind of picked up on the idea that the vegetarian lifestyle was probably appealing to many people. And and you can see it in Ashoka Maurya himself. So, there was also, the main thing is there was a widespread availability of fruits, vegetables, and dairy products. I mean, you can't imagine really vegetarianism arising in Russia, say, because, what would people eat? So it's harder, but I think this is kind of why it became popular. So that's how it kind of got rooted in India. Now the question is, how and when did it spread to the rest of the world? Okay, now we have to go to Alexander the Great, who invaded. He didn't really get into what's India today. It was really more Pakistan, but there was no Pakistan and India in those days. And a lot of Greeks, there was a lot of interaction with the Greeks and the Indians, even before Alexander. And the Greeks were very impressed with the intelligence and the austere lifestyle of the ascetics that they met. There was two groups. They called them Brahmanes and Shramanes. I think probably the Brahmins and the Shramans were more the ascetics that they met. And the Megasthenes, who wrote a book kind of about India, he said that they lived frugally, they never drank wine, and they ate mainly a mixture of rice and a thick stew, maybe some kind of curry. And he attributed the fact that many of them did just eat a vegetarian diet. So he was very impressed with that. And Alexander, too, he brought, even brought a Brahmin with him back to Persia, where he died. But he also, Alexander, liked to talk to them and find out what they were thinking. Now, the Greeks had their own vegetarian tradition, and it was called Pythagorean, after the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. And if you studied geometry in school, you know the Pythagoras theorem. Well, this was the same Pythagoras. Now, he also concluded that it was wrong to eat animals. One reason was he believed in metempsychosis, that human souls were reborn into other animals. And some people believe that he probably was influenced by Indian ideas, and some claim that he went to India in search of philosophical knowledge, although this has not been proven. But it really does seem more than a coincidence that Greece and India both had this idea of not eating animals for the good of your soul. Now, in the early days of Christianity, this is very interesting because the early fathers of the church, the early people who ruled the church, like St. Jerome in the 4th century CE, they defended vegetarianism. They said by showing the spiritual benefits of fasting, Indian Brahmins should be emulated by Christians. There was the idea that in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve only ate vegetables. It was only after the fall, when they ate, the serpent tempted them, that they began to eat meat. Now, we really don't know, but that's one theory that came about. And then another, Saint Benedict, who was the founder of the Benedictine order, he laid down rules that were followed by many monastic orders, that no four-footed animals should be eaten in monasteries. And even today, the Cistercians, the Trappists, and other groups follow this, even though they just don't have meat in their monasteries. And some theologians tried to reconcile Christianity with what they observed in India. They said, well, the Garden of Eden probably may have been in India because there people eat vegetarian food just as Adam and Eve did before the fall. These are all explanations that they came up with trying to kind of justify it. But later, they did a total about-face, and they condemned vegetarianism as a heresy, citing biblical passages that God made animals for man's use. And you can find passages in the Bible that say that as well. And Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian in the 13th century, declared, "It matters not how man behaves to animals, because God has subjected all things to man's power." And there was a sect in southern France called the Cathars, who were vegetarian, and they were declared heretics, and they were persecuted by the Inquisition. So you had this kind of ambivalent idea within the Christian church. Now, throughout the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Europeans continued to be really interested in India and their lifestyle. And this was stimulated by travelers to India. For example, Marco Polo wrote that the Indians he met were virtuous, honest, bathed regularly, unlike Europeans at that time, and led long and healthy lives because they didn't kill any living being, neither fly nor flea in the world, because they say they have souls. Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, he read a lot about India, and some claim he even traveled there. He opposed cruelty to animals, and he followed a vegetarian diet that led a contemporary to compare him to a Gujarati king. Now, one of the most influential proponents of vegetarian in the 17th century was this guy, Thomas Tryon. And he lived 1634 to 1703. And he formed a group of Hindu vegetarians in England, and he wrote many self-help books promoting the idea of a vegetarian diet and abstinence from tobacco and alcoholic. He linked Europeans' treatments of animals to their degradation of the natural world, including pollution, urban pollution, poisoned rivers. So he was an early environmentalist. And his writings encouraged Benjamin Franklin to become a vegetarian, at least for a while. I don't think he kept it up. And Another outspoken advocate of vegetarianism was this fellow named John Oswald. He served as a soldier in India in the 18th century, and he became really enthralled by India, and he adopted vegetarian as part of an anti-establishment political agenda. He was a radical politician, and he joined his radical politics with animal rights. This book that he wrote, The Cry of Nature, or An Appeal to Mercy and Justice on Behalf of the Persecuted Animals, he wrote that man is instinctively compassionate, and if he had to personally experience the death of the animals he ate, a vegetarian diet would be far more common. And even Sir William Jones, who of course is the man who discovered that Sanskrit was an Indo-European language, and really how Indian languages were related to other languages. He tried to reconcile, he was very religious actually, he was a very active Christian, but he tried to reconcile Christian scriptures with Hinduism by claiming that the doctrine of ahimsa had its roots in the law of Noah. I don't know what those are, I'm sorry. But he was an animal rights advocate, and he ate a light diet of rice and vegetables and very little meat. Now, in the 18th century, you had a philosophical movement in Europe called deism. And this was the belief in the existence of a supreme being who did not intervene in the universe. So this led to skepticism about Christianity and an interest in vegetarianism among European intellectuals. For Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he argued that humans are not naturally carnivorous, and he praised the virtue of a simple natural diet. The French philosopher Voltaire, he wrote about India. He'd never been there, but he imagined it. He praised the Brahmins as enlightened advocates of a natural diet. In one of his stories, a young Hindu traveler in England is shocked by the barbarism of the inhabitants' food. And some proponents of the French Revolution advocated a meat-free diet as a sign of egalitarianism. So you had this connection between radical politics and vegetarianism, which is kind of interesting. But by far the most influential vegetarian in the 19th century was Henry Salt. And he was a social reformer who was born in India, and he wrote almost 40 books, among them A Plea for Vegetarianism. And he really was an inspiration for Mahatma Gandhi. And I'll talk a little bit about Mahatma Gandhi in a minute, and I'll do that now. So he really is somebody who really actively advocated vegetarianism in India and related it to the independence movement. And what's interesting is that he was born into a Vaishnava family in Gujarat, where there was a strong Jain presence. His family was vegetarian, and his mother often fasted. But when he was a teenager, a friend persuaded him to try meat. And this is from his own autobiography. Now, at the time, there was a popular belief that the British owed their strength and power to their consumption of meat. A popular poem went, "Behold the mighty Englishman, he rules the Indians small. Because being a mean eater, he is 5 cubits tall." And the British kind of said, oh, the reason the Indians are weak and under our, the ones who because they're vegetarian, they don't eat meat. And actually, it was very harmful, because if you read about what people in Calcutta, for example, ate in the 18th, 19th century, they'd eat these huge diets with all kinds of meat and a lot of alcohol. And I mean, this is in the heat of Calcutta. And some people even then said, some doctors said, you shouldn't do this, you should eat like the local people do. But it was just a proof, kind of a sign of their identity, that they ate this very awful diet, and probably one reason that many of them became ill. So Gandhi was persuaded by this friend to eat meat. So this is what he writes in his autobiography. "We went in search of a lonely spot by the river, and there I saw for the first time in my life meat. There was baker's bread also. I relished neither. The goat's meat was as tough as leather. I simply could not eat it. I was sick and had to stop eating. I had a very bad night afterwards. A horrible nightmare haunted me. Every time I dropped off to sleep, it would seem as though a live goat were bleating inside me, and I would jump up full of remorse. I would remind myself that meat eating was a duty, and so became more cheerful." But he eventually, in 1888, he left to England to study law. So his mother made him swear an oath before a Jain monk that he would never touch meat, alcohol, or women. So first of all, he ate only a diet of boiled vegetables and bread until he discovered a vegetarian restaurant in London, and he became a follower of Sir Henry Salt and the Vegetarian Society. Now, Salt himself cited moral reasons for being a vegetarian, including the violence in the eating of meat and the non-violence that could be achieved from abstaining from it. And Gandhi could identify these ideas with ahimsa. So he said the choice was now made in favor of vegetarianism, the spread of which henceforth became a mission. And in 1890, he joined the London Vegetarian Society, and he became very active of this group. Now, in one of his speeches he gave to the society, he said, people who become vegetarians purely for health reasons usually fail, because vegetarianism requires a moral basis as well as a practical one. Some vegetarians make food a fetish and think that by becoming vegetarians, they could eat as much lentils, beans, and cheese as they like, but this didn't improve their health. The secret to remaining healthy is to cut down the quantity of food and reduce the numbers of meals. So I think this is very, very advice we can all follow today. And then another group that also advocated vegetarian was the Theosophical Society under Annie Besant, who of course became, I think, the first president of the Congress. And I should add that we know this, that even Swami Vivekananda was kind of influenced by this idea about meat eating. He was meat, and he was a very good cook. And when he came to America, he would often cook meat for his followers, but not beef, of course. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not keeping up with my slides very well, but this is kind of a summary of what I said about Gandhi's progress. And one of the people who was very influenced by him was the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, who also became an advocate of nonviolence. And another was Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, who is an icon of America, and he advocated self-sufficiency and frugality. And he came to vegetarianism through his friendship with Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there was a group in New England very influenced by Indian philosophy at that time, especially the Upanishads. So that was kind of in the air in New England. Now, although Thoreau did advocate a vegetarian diet, he supplemented it with fish and animals he killed himself, arguing that hunting brought people in contact with nature. Now, the second wave is actually began in the West in the 1960s. There was a great deal of interest in India, first because of the Beatles and other people who went there. Ravi Shankar they brought him. There was a lot of interest in Indian music. And all four of the Beatles became a vegetarian at some point. I think only Paul McCartney really stuck to it and really became an advocate of vegetarianism. And today, vegetarianism has other motivations. People become vegetarians because of animals' rights issues, the concern over animal treatment, many because of environmental concerns, because meat is a great waste of energy and burns off a lot of greenhouse gases. And so there are different motivations. As far as the spread of vegetarianism goes, I think that today, of course, India has the world's largest percentage, although the percentage is less than people think. It's probably around, and this is based on government statistics, it's probably 31% nationwide, and it could be even lower because some people just eat meat occasionally. It's very unevenly distributed. The highest proportions of over 50% are in Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, and Punjab. And the lowest percentage are in Kerala, West Bengal, and Tamil Nadu. People are surprised by that, but only 3% of Tamil Nadu, according to this government survey, are vegetarians. Worldwide, countries with the largest share of vegetarians are people who eat mainly a vegetarian diet, ranging from 5 to 19% include Australia, Italy, Germany, the UK, Taiwan, and Israel. It's kind of interesting. About 8 to 9% of Israelis are vegetarians. And there's also a worldwide trend to eating more plant-based food. And some people prefer the term plant-based food to vegetarianism. In the United States, for example, 23% of Americans say they try to eat less every meal, and the figure is even higher among millennials. And people, as I said, people avoid meat for many reasons. concerned with the environment, health, kindness, religious belief, economics. But I think in all cases, the trail leads back to India. So thank you. Oh, there's my books.
Yeah, we have some time for question and answers.
Okay, one thing. Yeah, actually, I have one question about, for example, if you take yogurt, right? I mean, I heard people say that yogurt originated in Egypt. But I see Vedic hymns where they refer to yogurt. I mean, for example...
Yeah, the origins of yoga are kind of debated. There's a lot of, I mean, what actually describes what yoga is? I mean, is it a lot of postures? Is it meditation? There's a lot of definitions of it.
Oh, okay.
So I think it's kind of hard to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
On the subject that you enlighten us, a couple of points. Actually, looking at the present state of advertisement and the different places for the common man, like Burger King and McDonald's and so many restaurants and this and that. So in the era of so much of information available, how much of this knowledge about the nutrition and food that it is in the literature and all, so how much it is being implemented and people have thought about it, because in the common man and the new generation, etc., not much thought is given to the values that you mention in the lecture.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
The question is that in the era where there is so much of information and knowledge available to the public, but their practical utilization in their own diet seems to be quite far distant from the values that is used in generations so far.
Yeah, I think that's what Gandhi opposed too. I mean, just eating vegetables just for its own sake or to be healthy, it won't work. You have to really be aware of the moral dimensions of what it means not to eat meat. So I think, yeah. Okay, well, you can ask me questions downstairs if you... Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Colleen, for a very enlightening discourse. I think we learned a lot. And she, perhaps if you wanted to refer back, because she had many references and data and historical information. So if you want to refer, we record these things and it will be published in the YouTube. So you can always refer back. And now I request our longtime devotee, Dr. Arvind Sisla, to give, on behalf of the Vedanta Society, a token of appreciation to Dr. Colleen Taylor-Sen. Thank you, and please join us downstairs for some refreshments.